In America right now, a child who grows up in foster care is twice as likely to end up in prison than to graduate college. Let that sink in for a moment. A system designed to protect vulnerable children is instead feeding them directly into jail cells. This isn't an accident. This isn't bad luck. This is the prison pipeline, and what I'm about to tell you will change the way you see child welfare in this country forever. Meet Mark Thompson. When he was 7 years old, Mark loved drawing superheroes. His favorite was Spider-Man because, as he told his teacher, Spider-Man lost his family too, but he still became a hero. Mark didn't choose to enter foster care. His mother struggled with addiction, and his father wasn't in the picture. Social services removed Mark and his younger sister from their home on a cold November night. Mark remembers clutching his sister's hand in the back of a stranger's car, promising her everything would be okay. But everything was not okay. Over the next 10 years, Mark moved through 14 different foster homes. 14 different beds. 14 different sets of rules. 14 times of packing his few belongings into a black trash bag and starting over. Some homes were fine. Some were neglectful. One was abusive. But when Mark reported it, he was the one who got moved, not the foster parents. By the age of 12, Mark had been to 7 different schools. Making friends became pointless. He'd just have to leave them behind. His grades, once decent, began to fall. Teachers labeled him a problem child. He started acting out, getting into fights, skipping classes. Nobody cared about me, Mark would later say in an interview. I was just a file folder being passed from desk to desk. At 15, after another placement disruption, Mark ran away. He lived on the streets for 3 weeks before police picked him up for shoplifting food from a convenience store. That shoplifting charge, stealing a sandwich and a bottle of water, was Mark's first entry into the juvenile justice system. It would not be his last. By the age of 17, Mark had been arrested 4 more times, for truancy, disorderly conduct, and violating curfew. Small offenses. The kind of things that kids with stable families get grounded for. But Mark didn't have a stable family. He had the system. At the age of 18, Mark aged out of foster care with nowhere to go, no support network, and a juvenile record that made finding jobs nearly impossible. Within 6 months, he was arrested for theft and sentenced to 2 years in adult prison. Mark's story isn't unique. It's terrifyingly common. Here's what most people don't understand about foster care. It's not just about finding kids a safe place to live. It's about what happens to those kids while they're in the system, and the truth is disturbing. The statistics don't lie. Let me share some numbers with you. 1 in 5 children in foster care will become homeless after aging out. Foster youth are 6 times more likely to develop PTSD than veterans of war. Within 2 years of leaving foster care, 60% of young men will be convicted of a crime. Girls who age out of foster care are twice as likely to become teen mothers, often perpetuating the cycle of poverty and instability. But here's the statistic that should make your blood boil. Studies show that foster children are arrested at twice the rate of non-foster children for the same behaviors. Why? Because the system treats normal teenage behavior as criminal behavior when you're in foster care. Zero tolerance in foster homes. Think about your own childhood for a second. Maybe you talked back to your parents. Maybe you stayed out past curfew. Maybe you got into a shoving match with a sibling. Your parents probably grounded you, took away your phone, made you do extra chores. But when foster kids do these same things, police get called. Foster parents, unlike biological parents, often have zero tolerance policies. They're overwhelmed, undertrained, and sometimes just don't want to deal with difficult behaviors. So they call law enforcement for situations that would never involve police in a traditional family. A foster kid slamming a door in frustration? That becomes destruction of property. A foster kid refusing to go to their room? That becomes disorderly conduct. A foster kid getting into a fight with another foster child in the same home? That becomes assault. Suddenly, a traumatized child acting out is transformed into a juvenile offender with a criminal record. The school-to-prison pipeline hits harder. Schools play a major role in this pipeline too. Foster children already struggle academically, constantly changing schools, dealing with trauma, lacking support with homework. They fall behind. They get frustrated. They act out. But instead of getting counseling or tutoring, they get suspended. They get expelled. They get referred to law enforcement. Research from Georgetown University found that foster children are more likely than other students to be disciplined for the same infractions. They're more likely to be handcuffed, more likely to be charged. One study in California found that foster youth made up only 4% of the student population, but they are accounted for 17% of arrests on school grounds. Think about that disparity. The trauma no one addresses. Here's something critical that the system ignores. Foster children are traumatized. They've been removed from their families. Even if those families were harmful, that removal is traumatic. They've been placed with strangers. Many have experienced abuse or neglect. They're grieving, angry, scared, and confused. Trauma affects the brain. It affects behavior. Kids who've experienced trauma have difficulty regulating emotions, trusting adults, and following rules, not because they're bad kids, but because their brains are wired for survival mode. But instead of providing intensive therapy and support, the system punishes them for trauma responses. A child having a panic attack is seen as defiant. A child with attachment issues who pushes people away is labeled difficult. A teenager who runs away because their foster home triggers memories of past abuse is charged with being incorrigible. The system criminalizes trauma, the money behind the pipeline. Now here's where it gets even darker. There's a financial incentive structure that actually rewards institutions for pushing foster kids into the justice system. Many states receive federal funding for foster children. But once a child turns 18 or gets locked up, that funding often disappears, unless they're incarcerated, in which case different funding streams open up. Private juvenile detention facilities and group homes get paid per child, per day. Some make more money from difficult kids with behavioral issues, the same kids who come from foster care. I'm not saying there's a conspiracy where people deliberately want to imprison foster children. But I am saying the financial structures create perverse incentives where there's more money in managing troubled kids through incarceration than through prevention and support. The lack of advocacy. Perhaps the most heartbreaking part of this pipeline is how alone these kids are. When a child from a stable home gets in trouble, parents hire lawyers, attend court dates, fight for their kid. They know the system. They have resources. Foster kids often have nobody. Their case workers are overloaded, managing 30 to 40 and even sometimes 50 kids at once. Their foster parents might not even show up to court. Many don't have lawyers, or they get overworked public defenders who barely have time to learn their names. These children navigate the legal system, one of the most complex systems in our society, essentially alone. And the courts? They see foster kid on the file and often make assumptions. They're seen as more likely to reoffend, more likely to lack support, more likely to need tough love, so they get harsher sentences. They get detained when other kids would get probation. They get adult charges when other kids would stay in juvenile court. The system fails them at every single turn. Let's go back to Mark Thompson, the boy who loved Spider-Man. Mark served his 2 years in prison. While there, he was housed with hardened criminals. He witnessed violence. He learned survival skills, but not the kind that help you build a life outside. When Mark was released at age 20, he faced the same problems he'd had at 18. But now magnified by a felony record. Can't rent most apartments with a felony? Check. Can't get most jobs with a felony? Check. Can't get student financial aid for college with a drug-related felony? Check. The system that had failed to protect Mark as a child now ensured he couldn't succeed as an adult. Mark tried. He really did. He worked under-the-table jobs. He couch-surfed. He filled out applications, hundreds of them, always checking that devastating box. Have you ever been convicted of a felony? Within a year, Mark was arrested again. This time for a probation violation. He missed a meeting with his parole officer because he didn't have transportation. That violation sent him back to prison for another year. The cycle continues. Mark's sister, Keisha, fared slightly better, but only slightly. She avoided the juvenile justice system, but she struggled too. Without Mark to look out for her, she moved through foster homes alone. At 16, she got pregnant, seeking the love and stability she'd never had. She dropped out of school. She ended up on welfare. Her son would eventually be removed by the same child protective services that had taken her from her mother. The cycle repeated. The broader impact. Stories like Mark and Keisha's play out thousands of times across America every single year. There are approximately 400,000 children in foster care in the United States right now. Every year, about 20,000 age out of the system. Within 4 years of aging out, 50% will be unemployed, 25% will experience homelessness, 20% will be incarcerated, only 3% will earn a college degree. Compare that to the general population, where 36% of young adults earn college degrees. These aren't just statistics. These are human beings. Kids who deserve better. Kids who needed protection and got punishment instead. The racial disparity. And we have to talk about race, because the foster care to prison pipeline disproportionately affects Black and Native American children. Black children make up 14% of the child population but 23% of foster children. Native American children are removed from their families at twice the rate of white children. Once in foster care, children of color face harsher outcomes. They're more likely to be placed in group homes instead of family settings. They're more likely to be disciplined by police. They're more likely to be tried as adults. This isn't accidental. It's a reflection of systemic racism baked into child welfare and criminal justice systems. The same communities that face over-policing, poverty, and limited resources see their children removed at higher rates, then watch as those children get funneled into prisons. The human cost. Let's talk about what society loses when we fail these children. Every foster child who ends up incarcerated instead of educated represents lost potential, lost contributions to society, lost innovations, lost leadership, lost humanity. Mark Thompson wanted to be an architect when he was young. Keisha wanted to be a nurse. How many doctors, teachers, engineers, artists, and leaders have we lost because we criminalized childhood trauma instead of healing it? The financial cost. And if moral arguments don't move you, consider the money. Incarcerating a young person costs an average of $150,000 per year. Keeping someone in the criminal justice system over a lifetime, prison, probation, court costs, can exceed $1 million per person. Meanwhile, proven programs that support foster youth, mentorship, housing assistance, therapy, education support, cost a fraction of that. The Jim Casey Youth Opportunities Initiative, which provides housing and support for youth aging out of foster care, costs about $30,000 per youth and has reduced homelessness and incarceration by more than half in participating programs. We could invest in success for less money than we currently spend on failure. But we don't. So what do we do about this? How do we break the prison pipeline? What's being done? First, let's acknowledge that some people are fighting back. Organizations like the Jim Casey Youth Opportunities Initiative, Foster Care to Success, and court-appointed special advocates CASA work tirelessly to support foster youth and prevent their criminalization. Some states have implemented reforms. Washington State passed laws prohibiting foster parents from calling police for normal teenage behaviors. California raised the foster care age limit to 21, giving youth more time to transition. Connecticut established a foster youth Bill of Rights, including protections against unnecessary criminalization. Individual advocates, former foster youth themselves, speak out and demand change. Mark Thompson, by the way, eventually found stability in his 30s. He now mentors foster youth and advocates for reform, trying to save kids from the path he was forced down. These efforts matter. They save lives, but they're not enough. Not nearly enough. What needs to change? Here's what real reform looks like. 1. Eliminate zero-tolerance policies. Foster parents need training and support to handle challenging behaviors without involving law enforcement. Natural consequences, not handcuffs. 2. Provide trauma-informed care. Every adult working with foster children, caseworkers, teachers, foster parents, judges, needs training in trauma and its effects. We need to respond to behavior as communication of unmet needs, not as criminality. 3. Increase support for aging out youth, housing assistance, job training, mentorship, therapy, educational support. These things need to be standard, not exceptional. No 18-year-old should be thrown onto the streets with a trash bag and told, "Good luck." 4. Reduce foster care entries. The best way to prevent the foster care to prison pipeline is to keep families together when safe to do so. This means investing in poverty reduction, addiction treatment, mental health services, and family preservation programs. 5. Address racial disparities. We need to examine and reform the biases in child welfare decision-making. We need to support communities of color with resources instead of punishment. 6. Reimagine juvenile justice. For foster youth who do enter the justice system, we need diversion programs, restorative justice, and rehabilitation, not detention. We need to address root causes, not just symptoms. What you can do, I know what you're thinking. This is too big. What can one person possibly do? More than you think. You can learn. Educate yourself about foster care and juvenile justice in your community. Attend a county board meeting. Read reports from child welfare agencies. You can volunteer. Become a CASA volunteer and advocate for a foster child in court. Mentor a foster youth. Donate to organizations supporting these kids. You can foster or adopt. If you're able, consider opening your home. And if you do, commit to understanding trauma and providing true support. You can advocate. Call your representatives. Support legislation that reforms child welfare and juvenile justice. Vote for policies that support families and children. You can employ. If you're a hiring manager, consider giving opportunities to young people with juvenile records. Don't let one mistake define someone's entire future. You can donate. Organizations working to break this pipeline need funding. Even small monthly donations help. You can share this story. Awareness is the first step to change. The more people understand this pipeline exists, the more pressure builds for reform. The bigger picture, here's the truth. The prison pipeline from foster care to jail is a symptom of deeper societal failures. It's about how we value children, especially poor children, children of color, children from broken families. It's about whether we believe in punishment or redemption, in barriers or second chances, in writing kids off or investing in their potential. It's about what kind of society we want to be. Right now, we're a society that takes traumatized children and traumatizes them further. We take vulnerable kids and make them more vulnerable. We take children who need help and give them handcuffs instead. We can do better. We must do better. Hope exists. Despite everything, hope exists. There are Mark Thompsons out there who beat the odds, who found support, who healed, who now help others. There are foster parents who truly love and advocate for their kids. Case workers who go above and beyond despite impossible caseloads. Teachers who see potential instead of problems. Judges who prioritize rehabilitation over punishment. Change is possible. But it requires all of us. It requires us to see foster children not as problems to manage, but as children to protect. Not as future criminals, but as future leaders, healers, and change makers, if only we give them the chance. Final thoughts. Every child deserves a childhood. Every child deserves safety. Every child deserves adults who believe in them, support them, and fight for them. The prison pipeline from foster care to jail is not inevitable. It's a choice we make as a society, a choice we can unmake. So the question is, what will you choose? Will you look away and let the pipeline continue? Or will you be part of breaking it? Because somewhere right now, there's a 7-year-old kid who loves Spider-Man and just got placed in their first foster home. Their future isn't written yet. What happens next is up to all of us. If this story opened your eyes, share it. Talk about it. Do something about it. Because silence allows the pipeline to flow. But awareness is the first step toward justice.